I want you to, like, picture something for a
That's
second.
okay, I'm picturing it.
So, on one hand, you have a 1913 French literary masterpiece.
Yeah.
We were talking, top hats, Parisian salons, delicate little cups of tea.
Right, very high culture.
Exactly. And then on the other hand, you have cutting-edge 21st century sports biomechanics, like motion capture suits, high-performance athletic training, incredibly dense biometric data.
Two completely different worlds.
Entirely incompatible, right?
Yeah.
At least when you first look at them. But today, for this deep dive, we're going to explore how they are actually describing the exact same human phenomenon.
It sounds like a massive stretch initially, I know. But the underlying neuroscience connects them in a way that makes a surprising amount of sense when you really dig into it.
Yeah.
What we are looking at is a synthesis of this highly subjective, poetic idea from the early 20th century and blending it with the hard, measurable data of modern kinesiology.
Which brings us to the actual mission of today's deep dive. We're unpacking a fascinating presentation from Dr. Christophe Delong in Kinexa formation.
Yeah, their work is really groundbreaking here.
It really is. They've put together a framework exploring what they call the Madeleine of movement. And our goal today is to see how the literary concept of involuntary memory maps directly onto human motor skills and, well, athletic mastery.
Right, but to understand this Madeleine of movement, we probably have to start with the actual Madeleine.
We do. For those listening who, might not be brushing up on their early 1900s French literature every weekend.
Which is most of us, to be fair.
Fair point. We are talking about Marcel Proust, specifically a very, very famous scene from his 1913 novel, Du Côté de chez Swann, or Swann's Way.
Yeah, it is arguably one of the most heavily analyzed passages in modern literature. The narrator is drinking a cup of tea and eats a piece of a Madeleine, which is, it's a small, shell-shaped sponge cake.
Right, I actually have the exact quote from the source material here. And the phrasing is remarkably precise for something written over a century ago. Proust writes, "But at the very instant when the mouthful of tea mixed with cake crumbs touched my palate, I quivered, attentive to the extraordinary thing that was happening inside me."
It's so visceral.
It really is. From that one simple physical taste, an entire, complex, highly detailed childhood memory just floods back into his mind. It arrives completely intact and totally without his conscious effort.
And that lack of conscious effort, that's the linchpin right there. Proust wasn't just writing lovely prose, he was, with incredible accuracy, describing what neuroscientists today call involuntary procedural memory.
Involuntary procedural memory.
Okay, right. So a basic sensory input, like a taste, an odor, a physical sensation, it automatically triggers a massively complex response schema with absolutely zero conscious intervention.
So the mind isn't like flipping through a filing cabinet trying to find the memory.
No, not at all. The core thesis from the Kinexa presentation is literally this: the body remembers before the mind searches.
The body remembers before the mind searches. I love that.
The body is already executing the memory before your conscious brain is even aware a search was needed in the first place.
To ground this in everyday experience for you listening, think about driving your usual route to work. You've likely had that moment where you suddenly snap to attention and realize you've driven 5 miles, navigated 3 complex intersections, and changed lanes twice, all without making a single conscious decision to do so.
Oh, absolutely. That is a prime example. Your conscious mind, your prefrontal cortex, was probably focused on, I don't know, an upcoming meeting or what you were going to have for lunch.
Right, something totally unrelated.
Exactly. But your body was seamlessly executing a highly complex motor program based on visual and spatial triggers. Like, the red light triggered your foot moving to the brake involuntarily.
You didn't think, oh, a red light, I should brake. You just did it.
Exactly. And in neuromotricity, specifically in the framework presented by Kinexa, this phenomenon is called the Generalized Motor Program, or the GMP.
Okay, GMP. I can totally see how that works for something mundane like driving, but how does this biological mechanism scale to the high-performance athletes that Kinexa is studying? Well, because, a professional tennis player returning a serve is dealing with speeds and reaction times that seem almost impossible for the human brain to process consciously.
Well, they're impossible to process consciously. That's exactly why the GMP is biologically necessary.
Right. What do you mean impossible?
Let's look at that tennis example directly from the presentation. A professional tennis serve can travel at 120 miles per hour.
Which is terrifying.
It is. And that speed gives the receiver about 400 milliseconds before the ball crosses the net. Now, human reaction time for a simple conscious decision is around 250 to 300 milliseconds.
Oh, wow. So there's almost no time.
Right. If the athlete sees the ball, calculates its trajectory in their visual cortex, sends that data to the prefrontal cortex to decide on a backhand, and then sends the signal to the motor cortex to swing,
The ball's already past them.
it's far too slow. The conscious pathway is literally too slow to play the sport. So when an expert athlete sees that ball coming, the visual sensation of the ball's trajectory triggers the GMP.
It just bypasses the conscious brain entirely.
Entirely. The sensory input skips the slow decision-making centers. Their body literally initiates the mechanical action of the swing before their conscious mind has even formulated a decision to do so.
That perfectly mirrors the Madeleine, doesn't it? The taste of the cake didn't make Proust say, I should try to remember my childhood.
Right, it just happened.
The taste triggered the memory instantly, just like the visual of the tennis ball triggers the swing instantly.
Yeah, and the presentation provides another excellent example of this. Think of a gymnast preparing for a vault.
Okay.
Simply seeing the springboard prepares the body's impulse. The micro-adjustments in muscle tension, the kinetic preparation, it all happens before the gymnast's mind can formulate a strategy for the jump.
So the visual of the springboard acts just like Proust's T.
Exactly. It unlocks a complete, complex physical memory instantly.
But, okay, that raises a glaring issue for anyone listening who isn't already a world-class athlete. I mean, we aren't born with these generalized motor programs for gymnastics or tennis.
No, we definitely aren't.
So what is the actual biological process of moving a clumsy conscious movement into that effortless involuntary state?
That process really begins with understanding the fundamental biomechanical bottleneck of the human brain.
Okay, unpack that for me.
When a beginner is learning a new movement, say a golf swing, they are acutely, almost painfully conscious. They are trying to manually control the angle of their wrist, the position of their feet, the rotation of their hips, all while remembering to keep their head down.
Yeah, it's just cognitive overload. Your brain only has so much bandwidth, and trying to pull 50 different levers at once just results in a chaotic, rigid movement.
It's a purely conscious gesture, and the prefrontal cortex is a terrible conductor for an orchestra of muscles.
That's a great way to put it.
But an expert thinks about absolutely nothing. Their body simply acts. And this state is what Kinexa calls motor automaticity. The journey of athletic training is essentially the journey of the Madeleine migrating a movement from the slow conscious domain into the lightning-fast involuntary domain.
So how does that migration actually happen? I mean, the conventional wisdom is just, practice makes perfect. You go out to the driving range and hit 10,000 golf balls until your brain finally gives up and lets your body take over.
Right, and conscious repetition is obviously required to build the initial motor schema. But here's where the Kinexa presentation introduces a massive Proustian twist.
Oh, I love a twist.
Practice is only half the equation. The actual transformation from a conscious struggle to an involuntary reflex doesn't happen on the practice field at all. It happens while the athlete is completely unconscious.
Wait, we are talking about the neurology of sleep.
We are. Proust actually titled the final volume of his massive novel Le Temps Retrouvé, which translates to Time Regained.
Time regained, okay.
And in the neuroscience of movement, this concept of time regained maps flawlessly to a biological process called nocturnal consolidation.
The presentation notes on nocturnal consolidation are absolutely fascinating, but let's really break down the mechanism for the listener, because it states that during sleep, the brain actively recovers, reinforces, and refines the fragile motor schemas learned that day.
Yes.
But it isn't just a passive rest state. How exactly is the brain refining a physical movement when the body is literally paralyzed in bed?
Think of it like a computer defragmenting its hard drive.
Okay, I'm following.
During the day, conscious practice creates messy, inefficient neural pathways. There's a lot of junk data as the brain tries different muscle activations.
It says you're just figuring it out.
Exactly. But during specific phases of sleep, particularly slow wave sleep, the brain essentially replays the tape of the movements you practice.
Really? It replays them?
Yeah, but it does so rapidly, pruning away the inefficient neural connections and strengthening the efficient ones. It is actively reinforcing the myelin sheath around those specific neural pathways.
And that's what makes the signals travel faster.
Precisely. It allows the electrical signals to travel faster and more reliably the next day.
Which leads to a claim Kinexa highlights that goes against almost everything we assume about hard work and the physical grind. They note that a physical gesture can significantly improve between two training sessions without any actual practice in between.
It's wild, but it's true.
Meaning, you could practice a complex tennis serve on Monday afternoon, struggle with the mechanics, go to sleep Monday night, wake up on Tuesday, and be measurably better at that serve without having touched a racket.
That is the biological reality of nocturnal consolidation. The defragmentation optimized the file path, so to speak. Proust was regaining lost time through memory. The athlete is regaining a refined, improved gesture without having physically practiced.
That completely recontextualizes the role of rest. It isn't just recovery, it's active skill acquisition.
Which is why Dr. Delong and the Kinexa team issue a really stark warning in their materials. A training program that marginalizes sleep in favor of just pushing harder and longer, it's fundamentally broken.
Because you're interrupting the defragging process.
Exactly. If you don't sleep properly, you rob the athlete of this essential Proustian time of consolidation. You leave the motor schema fragile and conscious, rather than giving the brain the biological environment needs to bake it into an involuntary reflex.
Okay, so we have the poetry of Proust, we have the neurology of the generalized motor program, and we understand the mechanism of nocturnal consolidation. But I have to push back here a little bit.
Go for it.
Proust's involuntary memory is, by its very nature, a subjective emotional experience, right? It happens invisibly inside his head.
Right.
How can Kinexa, as a modern biomechanics and tech company, claim to put a hard number on a Madeleine moment? Are we stripping away the essence of the concept, but trying to turn the unconscious into an algorithm?
That is the central tension of their work, for sure. But quantifying it doesn't strip away the magic. It actually proves the magic exists.
Okay, how so?
The challenge is tracking what Kinexa calls the lost gesture, a movement that has slipped below the threshold of conscious awareness. They solve this using modern biomechanical tracking, which generates thousands of data points per second.
That's a lot of data.
It is. And the presentation outlines 3 highly specific metrics they use to mathematically prove a movement has become involuntary.
If they're establishing a baseline, they must be tracking highly specific data points to prove automaticity. What is the first metric they use?
The first metric is called the distance to automaticity.
Distance to automaticity.
Right. Kinexa establishes a baseline of what the complete expert automatic schema looks like for a specific movement. We are talking about deep kinematic data here. The precise degrees of knee flexion, the exact millisecond timing of hip rotation, the velocity of the limbs. They basically map the perfect involuntary gesture.
So they take an amateur's messy data cloud and compare it to the expert's tight, optimized data cluster.
That's exactly the mechanism. They measure an athlete's current movement and calculate the mathematical distance between their current execution and that expert ideal.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they can tell an athlete precisely how far away their current conscious struggle is from fluid automaticity.
Which is infinitely more useful than a coach just saying, you know, you look a little rigid today. An algorithm could literally say, your biomechanical execution is currently 32% deviated from the established automatic schema because your hip rotation is 15 milliseconds late.
Exactly. The precision is unmatched.
Okay, so if we can measure the distance to the goal, how do they measure the impact of the sleep we talked about? I imagine that's the second metric.
It is. The second metric is consolidation tracking, and this directly addresses the nocturnal defragmentation process we just discussed.
If they want to prove that sleep actually optimized the neural pathways, they would have to measure the athlete's movement immediately the next day.
Yeah.
Right? Before the conscious brain has a chance to warm up and interfere.
That is the exact methodology. Kinexa analyzes the movement data from Monday's session and compares it to the very first movements of Tuesday's session to see if the schemas learned previously were actually consolidated during sleep.
That's brilliant.
If the sleep was effective, the data on Tuesday should show a measurable shift toward automaticity, a tighter data cluster, even before they warm up.
And if the data doesn't show that shift, what then?
Then the coach knows immediately that consolidation failed. It might be due to poor sleep architecture, elevated cortisol levels from stress, or maybe just simple overtraining.
It changes the feedback loop entirely.
It really does. You aren't just measuring the physical exertion on the muscles, you are measuring the neurological absorption of the training in the brain.
That is fascinating. Okay, that leaves the third metric. We've measured the gap to perfection, and we've measured the sleep consolidation. What's left to track?
The ultimate test of the Madeleine. The third metric is the variability index. which tests how regular and robust the athlete's movement is when they are placed under varying conditions and pressure.
Like a stress test.
Exactly.
Because if a movement relies on the prefrontal cortex, and the prefrontal cortex gets flooded with adrenaline and anxiety, the movement should fall apart.
Right, precisely why they track it. If a gesture is truly automatic, if it has become a genuine motor, Madeleine, it shouldn't break down when the crowd is screaming, or when the athlete is exhausted, or when the weather is bad.
Because it's locked in.
Right. True involuntary memory is incredibly robust because it doesn't require conscious bandwidth. If Kinexa's data shows that an athlete's technique becomes highly variable under pressure, the mathematical variability index spikes.
Proving that the movement hasn't actually been handed over to the motor cortex yet. It's still just a conscious disguise.
Exactly. The variability index mathematically proves whether a gesture has achieved true, bulletproof automaticity. The conscious brain might be panicking, but the motor program just runs on autopilot.
It is incredibly satisfying to see this, like, poetic concept validated with such rigorous, undeniable data.
It's the perfect marriage of art and science.
To ensure you listening can actually visualize how this applies to skill acquisition, let's synthesize this into the actionable framework that Kinexa presents. They lay out a 4-step cycle, which they call the Kinexa multiplied by Proust framework.
It's a cohesive summary of the entire biological loop. Let's walk through it. Step 1 is sensation.
This is the trigger, the visual cue, physical feeling, or spatial relationship that involuntarily activates the motor program, like the gymnast seeing the springboard.
Right. The gymnast sees the board, which leads to step 2, which is practice. This is the conscious, gritty part of the cycle.
The struggle phase.
Exactly. When the gymnast is first learning the vault, they have to deliberately and consciously repeat the mechanics to build the initial schema. It is exhausting, and the resulting movement is incredibly fragile.
Which necessitates step 3, consolidation. The gymnast has to step away from the mat and sleep.
They have to.
The brain takes over, defragments the messy neural data of the day's practice, and strengthens the specific pathways of the learned gesture without any conscious interference.
And if the gymnast respects the sensation, puts in the conscious practice, and allows for deep nocturnal consolidation over time, they arrive at step 4, which is automaticity, the Madeleine moment.
They are at the Olympics, they see the springboard, and the perfect gesture returns effortlessly, involuntarily, and reliably, regardless of the pressure.
It shifts from being something they do to something that happens to them.
For those of you who want to explore the mechanics of this deeper, the presentation provides several essential resources from Kinexa Formation. They have published an ebook titled Proust Mémoire Involontaire du Corps, which translates to Proust Involuntary Memory of the Body.
And they also highlight episode 48 of a series called The Gesture Visionaries.
Oh, right.
And for a more visual breakdown of the metrics we discussed, they offer the full Kinexa times Proust visual presentation deck, which maps out the kinematic data side of things really clearly.
And everything is anchored at their training portal at formation.kinexa.ai, where you can see direct demonstrations of how this biometric tracking works in practice.
It's highly recommended if you want to see the data in action.
So, what is the ultimate takeaway from the research presented by Dr. Christophe Delong and Kinexa Formation?
I think they're asking us to fundamentally change the way we view practice, sleep, and the neurological potential of our own physical bodies.
I agree completely.
The ultimate goal of training isn't to force the body into submission through sheer conscious willpower. The goal is to train the body so methodically and let it rest so deeply that the perfect gesture returns like Proust's Madeleine entirely involuntarily. It validates the absolute necessity of rest, and it proves through data that the most complex achievements of the human body only happen when the conscious mind finally gets out of its own way.
It's a really profound way to think about human potential. And I want to leave you listening right now with a final thought to mull over today. Think about a complex physical task you perform daily with absolute effortless perfection.
Like typing.
Yeah, exactly. Typing an incredibly complex computer password without ever looking at the keys. Or maybe it's that split-second moment you knock a glass off a counter and your hand just darts out and catches it in midair before your conscious mind even realizes you dropped it.
Those moments are amazing.
The next time you experience one of those tiny moments of physical magic, take a second to wonder, what other deeply encoded physical memories is your body holding on to, just waiting for the right sensory trigger, the perfect little Madeleine, to suddenly pull them to the surface?